Hi, Kate. Thanks for taking the time to chat with me today.
Hi, Morgan. How are you?
Doing well. Maybe I'd love to get a little bit of a better sense because, as much as I'm managing 3,000 acres now, I wasn't there in the start. About what brought you to this organization, a little bit about your background.
Sure. My background is I grew up in Scotland and I came to Australia 7 years ago, actually, by mistake almost. But I love it here now. It's absolutely brilliant. By training, I'm a landscape architect and urban designer, and I work in strategic planning now for a government agency or for a council, which is wonderful because I get to shape the way people will live into the future and hopefully create places that people love and help people to connect. 3,000 Acres was started, I think we're on our 5-year anniversary-ish, is that right?
Yeah,
at the moment, which I'm so proud of that we've managed to keep going for 5 years, and hopefully we'll keep going into the future. And we can talk a bit later about how that might happen. It was started in response to a Vic Health question. So Vic Health put a question out or a challenge out to the public. I can't remember quite how it was phrased, but it was something like, how can we increase the consumption of fruit and vegetables? Because Australia is in an obesity crisis, there's lots of health problems, lots of people who are overweight, lots of problems with the food that we consume. It's very convenient to go to the supermarket and buy the cheap stuff on offer. I do it still, it's convenient, Convenience trumps when you're busy, unfortunately. And our response, so myself and a group of other people I was working with at the time, had read some research about if you grow your own fruit and veg, you're more likely to eat more fruit and veg more often. So we thought, okay, maybe if we can come up with an idea to help people access land to grow more fruit and vegetables on, then people will eventually and hopefully eat more fresh food. So the idea of 3,000 Acres came about. There was a similar project in New York called 596 Acres. We were really, really inspired by what they were doing, which was unlocking vacant land to help people access land to grow fruit and veg on. And we thought we could use that model, bring it to Melbourne. The 3,000 came from postcode 3,000. So lots of the interesting work that was happening in the city in the 80s. And 3,000 Acres was born 5 years ago, and we were very lucky to win that challenge. So we had a grant from Vic Health, $100,000 to start the project, which we wouldn't exist without that. So
Absolutely.
Thanks to Vic Health.
And it's just grown from there.
Yes, yeah, it has.
I think that probably the 3,000 postcode and the Melbourne specificity is an important note to make when we both happen to have accents,
Yes.
despite being Melbourneians, which I've just realized.
You sound American, but
I
you're
do.
actually Australian.
Right. I've lived here since I was 9 years old. So moved here with my mom's job. We were meant to stay 3 years and loved it so much we became citizens. But constantly have people convinced that I've just moved here.
Yes.
So
The accent has stuck. It's funny, isn't it?
stuck.
Some people lose it and some people, lots of my Scottish friends sound way more Scottish than they did when they arrived.
But of course, when I go back to the States, they say, oh man, you sound so Aussie.
Yeah.
So, it balances out. I fit it in either place. But
So when did you join 3,000 Acres?
So back in February of this year, so it's been almost a year now that I've had a chance
Gosh,
to
it seems like you've been here longer than that.
I know, to me too. Simultaneously just gotten here and been here forever, which
So what
is always the way.
attracted you to come and work for us for 3,000 Acres?
I think 3,000 Acres was suddenly the merging of my professional and personal life. I mean, by training, I studied law and had some experience working in the law, as well as in not-for-profit management. But in my personal life, with these big stressful jobs, working in prisons, working in West Africa, something that I was doing at home was growing my own food, which if you'd asked me 6 years ago, I would have said that was crazy. I'd never kept a plant alive in my life. I lived with a small balcony, and one day my partner and I on a whim just put a tomato bush in and said, oh, what's gonna happen? And then there were these mountains of tomatoes, and I swear to this day that tomatoes are the gateway drug of the horticultural world. That you plant a tomato, and suddenly you're convinced that you should go off grid and grow all your own food.
And the smell.
Oh, the smell,
So
and
good.
just the taste. I think when I have a lot of friends who I went to law school with, and this whole urban ag world is really strange to them. And they come to my house and I show them, and these are my black tomatoes, and these are my green ones, and these are my orange ones. And they don't believe me that, food comes in all of these different colors and shapes because, of course, we don't eat all of the heirloom varieties available to us when we're looking at a grocery store. And I kind of love that. I would love to have more friends who are really into it, but at the same time, I think kind of showing people this whole wide world of food and growing and gardens is kind of exciting. So
people can be quite flippant about growing your own food.
Yes.
Have you found that?
Absolutely.
Why do you think it's actually important and essential?
Oh, gosh. People are definitely flippant about it, that it's, oh, well, you're still going to a grocery store and, you're not going to grow significant food. And I think a lot of people have tried it at some point and faced this disappointment factor where it didn't grow for whatever reason or they didn't get a good crop. And they think, well, this is a bit ridiculous. Let's leave it to the farmers. But growing your own food, I don't want to sound ridiculous in this, but it's changed my life completely. I didn't grow up with a good relationship with food, and I think that's true of people who have been overeating or experienced unhealthiness, obesity in their lives, or those who have perhaps just not had the experience cooking. I grew up eating takeout food and then got into my adult life, and it wasn't until I grew my own food that I started developing a better sense of my kind of nutritional needs, but also a better connection with nature, I think. That, I'd gone hiking and I loved the outdoors, but this was a whole other world of how I'm interacting with nature to sustain myself. And it really made me think about other sustainability issues, that growing your own food links you into all of that sort of work around topsoil and composting, but even wider to thinking about climate change and the way that the industrial agricultural system is really putting us in a tough situation looking forward.
It's a great way to get into those conversations and an easy way to think about, that bigger picture.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think particularly when, people are kind of hot on war on waste right now, and they saw that, if the banana is not perfectly this size and this color, it's going to get chucked out. And that was shocking to people. But of course, that's how an industrial agricultural system works, that we don't have an appreciation for root vegetables that grow in a funny way and fruit and veg that are the wrong size, because we pick everything when it's really small and all the same shape, and then we blast it with chemicals to make it look exactly the same in the grocery store. And those are issues you don't engage with, I think, until you grow your own food.
It's very easy not to. There's two things I love about growing your own food. One of them is rebellion, and the other is connection. And I think it's rebellious to grow your own food because you're taking yourself out of that system.
Absolutely.
And you're setting up a different localized system. And it's such an easy yet such a rebellious act.
Absolutely.
To not buy into the big supermarkets, to big agriculture, to big chemicals. And I think that's quite satisfying.
Absolutely. That guerrilla gardening aspect to it, or stepping out of the kind of traditional capitalist lens.
Exactly.
And that's what leads you into the connection, as you're saying.
The connection thing is really, really important for me, because I think we had a phrase at the beginning of 3,000 Acres was more people, more food, and more places. And one of the amazing things that food can do, growing your own food, cooking your own food, sharing food, is to allow you to connect with other people.
Yeah.
To connect with your neighbours, to connect with your friends and family. I grow my food in my front garden as an excuse to talk to people who are walking past and to have discussions with the neighbours, which is awesome. In the UK, you can get an allotment really easily. So I had an allotment back in Leeds, and an allotment's it's like a little patch of ground. It's actually quite big, probably, from memory, 20 metres by 5 metres.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's huge.
It's pretty big. And they're all over the UK, historically from World War II, where we had a big push to grow your own fruit and veg. So I was going to take a little sip of water because my voice is going.
It really is. But I mean, with what you're talking about there with connection, I mean, there's the historical aspect that you're talking about there and growing food in your front yard. I love that it's multi-generational and
well, that was the thing about the allotment. in Leeds, in my allotment, I had friends all ages from all over the place. And I just absolutely loved it. We entered our jams into funny little competitions and had...
Did you win?
I came second.
Wow.
I still got the certificate in the house.
That's a big
I
accomplishment.
know, it was great. But yeah, I had all these different age, different generation, different culture, background, friends in Leeds, which was great because I was at uni, so really most of my friends were my own age. And I missed that friendship variety.
Yeah.
And I missed it when I got here. So I arrived in Melbourne and I had an immediate friendship group of people actually who'd moved from the UK and people who I knew that I used to work with. But we were all the same. We were all really from the same background and of the same age. So I went looking for an allotment and I was really surprised that I couldn't find one.
Yeah.
And the allotments that I did see behind fences, I wasn't allowed into because I wasn't part of that community. And I was thinking, but that's not the point. You know, growing food is about everybody having access and about the community being everybody and about sharing. So that was another of the driving factors for starting 3,000 Acres was to open up that possibility for people who were renting or didn't have gardens or wanted to grow food with other people, was to open up that access and create that kind of allotment vibe in Melbourne. For one of the primary purposes, connecting with people who are not like you.
Yeah.
So it opens up your worldview.
Absolutely.
And allows you to really understand people and food and sharing and really feel connected to the country and to the land and to yourself, because you learn a lot about all of those things when you grow your own fruit and vegetables.
You definitely do. And you're exactly right that I don't think I really interacted with people that much older than myself before I was growing food. And then I started keeping my own bees. I got a beehive and found that it was pretty surprising in my bee club that I was female and pretty surprising that I was under the age of 50.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
So bees attract older men.
A lot of the
about
time.
the bees.
But it was that, and it's also, I live in Northcote, which is, quickly gentrifying, but traditionally has been a lot of, families of people from Italy and from Greece who moved here around World War II, who still live there, but are now quite socially isolated in a lot of cases. And the suburbs really changing quite quickly. And these are people who I now talk tomatoes with and talk zucchinis with. And otherwise, I don't know what would be that point of interaction between us, but I really do find that it's changed my view of who's on my street and just increased the number of people I'm connecting with. And I think it's amazing. You see that in community gardens as well. Absolutely.
And it's not just age ranges, it's also different cultural backgrounds. There's something that you have in common. Everybody eats.
Yep.
Everybody needs to. So if you're thinking, I want to chat to that person, but I don't know what to talk about, I don't know, then you can talk about tomatoes.
Yes.
Or you can talk about whatever weird thing that they happen to be about. You can learn about culture through food. It's just a very easy way in, an easy conversation starter about culture, about background, about climate change, about all the big issues that that you can't start that conversation easily otherwise.
Absolutely. And that's a really good point about climate change, that it's interesting talking to Melbourne gardeners that they're even able to identify, well, in the last 10 years, my nasturtiums went from being an annual that I grew in the warmer months to living all year round because we're not getting those harsh frosts anymore. And people who wouldn't necessarily interact with that are just literally observing a change in their environment that is small right now, but quite noticeable for someone who's growing their own food that I don't think you notice if you're not interacting with your environment in that way.
Well, you don't interact with your environment really living in the city.
No.
You kind of, especially in Melbourne where you don't get trees that lose their leaves. You don't, the nature that you're surrounded by in the urban environment is fairly, it's fairly difficult to notice the seasons unless you're paying attention.
Yeah.
But if you're growing your own food, you're really connected much more into nature. And that's really important for your psyche, biophilia.
Absolutely.
We're connected, we're part of the natural world. Often humans think about themselves as being separated, but actually we're part of everything. We're animals, we're part of it. And growing your own food and being part of that system really helps you to understand that a lot better. And it helps to put everything into context.
It does. And I think also beyond, we already talked about how it influences the fruit and veg that people eat. But the big one I find is seasonality. That it's wholly unsustainable, that we have this expectation that we can eat stone fruit all year round, or eat apples, or eat broccoli all year round. And when you grow your own food and you go, oh, these things don't grow in the summer, or these things don't grow in the colder months, you suddenly get this sense of seasonality and how that might have a link with our expectations in the grocery store and sustainability.
Yeah.
And I find that time and time again in community gardens, people will come in May and want to plant tomatoes. And hypothetically, they might find them in a gardening store somewhere, but they're not going to grow, but they're going to die very soon after that. And people are shocked because it's not a concept of nature you've had to interact with, that there are these seasons that come and go and affect the way that things live and die in the ground. And that's shocking to me now that I've had a few years of gardening experience, but I think it's such a fundamental one, is that literacy around seasonality that comes with growing your own food.
And the joy around seasonality. One of the things I love about growing your own food is marking the seasons through, or marking the events through the year. You know, Passata Day. Bottling your tomatoes and then eating them in the winter. It's like opening a bottle of sunshine. And, you know, Passata Day with friends. It's just fantastic.
It is.
I really want to be adopted by an Italian family because they just do it so well. You know,
do.
Salami Day, Passata Day, harvesting olives, all of the wonderful things. Yeah, it just marks your calendar throughout the year with an excuse to get together, to have fun, and then it sprinkles your year with these great delights of bottled and preserved gorgeous surprises.
Absolutely.
And then you remember the event and you remember what a lovely time you had with your family and your friends and your neighbours.
So true. It's so special, I think, you know, when people find out I have bees, that they're like, oh, I want to buy honey from you. And I'm like, I'll give you honey. That's definitely going to be your Christmas gift because I get 30 kilos a year per hive. So of course you're going to be getting some honey.
Well, again, it opens up another rebellious act of sharing and swapping rather than buying stuff. So your honey will be fabulous currency. You can swap it for people who make their own beer and, you know, lots of other things, clothes, whatever you want. You can get into that sharing economy, which once again takes you out of that capitalist economy. So food is the gateway drug to a different type of life, where you're just, you know, slightly sidestepping the what's expected.
Absolutely. And I think that a lot of people don't even realize that there is this whole non-monetary economy, or this kind of like just very natural human connection around food swaps and food as free carts. I've had friends say, when I've told them, I swap food with people, you know, I take all of these figs I'm harvesting off my tree and I can get some things that I'm not growing. And people always say, oh, well, how do you know how much you can take? And do you weigh it at the start? And no, you put it down on the table and you take what you need and you talk to people and you have a genuine interaction and no one cares.
People always take less than what they bring.
Absolutely.
There's always stuff left at the end of food swaps.
There are.
You have to, and well, 3,000 acres, lots of our gardens are open to the public, no fences. So there's food growing in really quite dense urban environments. And do you find people steal food?
No, and realistically, it's the possums that you're facing off against, if anything, in an unfenced community garden. It's not about stealing food. People come and they realize that food is growing there and they ask questions and they interact with it. But I hear very few stories of an issue with theft of food.
I haven't noticed it at all. There seems to be some kind of inbuilt respect. And really you have to make big signposts saying this is a garden for everybody. Yes. Please harvest something.
Come in.
Come in and enjoy and share and harvest because, the feeling is that people, well, it's a confusing aspect, I guess, that this food is free. Help grow it, help care for it, and then take some.
Absolutely. And I found that the first time I ever wanted to give some food to my neighbors, I was knocking on their door and saying, hey, can you use some zucchinis? It was confusing because we don't have those sort of interactions. We don't even really know our neighbors in a lot of cases, or the people around us. That one of the reasons that councils wants to work with us at 3,000 acres is they've read these stats around a lot of Melburnians don't know a neighbor to ask for help if something goes wrong. And that's really alarming for a council that needs to have emergency preparedness. They need to have resilience for their community. That if someone has, for example, injured themselves and can't go to a neighbor, or there's been a big storm and a tree has come through the window, people don't have others in their street that they can interact with.
It's a really big problem.
It is.
And I've got another project looking at this as well, 5 Up, 5 Down, which is all about trying to help people to connect with their neighbours. But food is an absolutely brilliant way to do it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and loneliness is an emerging health issue. It's going to be a bigger problem as obesity in the future. And really, a really easy way to tackle loneliness and to tackle that disconnection in neighbourhoods is to get people growing food together and sharing food.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Because it's not just the physical health about, the obesity aspect or, getting outside and gardening.
It's absolutely the mental health aspect and the resilience aspect completely. Yeah. So 3,000 acres, we keep mentioning this. What is it? What does it do?
Yeah, we haven't gotten very far on that one. We got too excited about urban agriculture. So 3,000 acres today from this vision that you had so many years ago is an urban agriculture charity in the sense that our focus is to help more people grow more food in more places. But that's actually quite diverse because people can grow food in their backyard. They could grow it on the nature strip at the front. They can grow it even in a community garden or in another environment where people are sharing the space and growing food. So we're always looking for opportunities and projects to create those opportunities. It is a bureaucratic nightmare for people to try and sort through that themselves, that they see this empty plot of land and they say, wouldn't it be great if me and my neighbors were growing food there? And then they're going to wait 4 years to talk to council, to find out who the landholder is, to deal with the water restrictions.
So I'm a member of the community. I see a piece of land that's been lying empty for ages. What are some of the hurdles that 3,000 acres helps people overcome?
Sure. So it's everything from finding out who owns the land to talking to that landholder. In a lot of cases, it's publicly held by, say, a council or a statutory body like Melbourne Water or VicTrack. But actually having the conversation with them of why food growing would be a good thing to do there, why it's safe, why it's going to be positive for the community. But then it's a lot of cost hurdles as well. There's everything from the insurance you require to water connections. A mains water connection or building a water tank could be a huge expense and really difficult for a community to front up. And all of this takes a long time. That if you're really enthusiastic about growing on that piece of land, you want to get to that really quickly, and it might take years to be able to start the project, which is a real problem for keeping up the enthusiasm and keeping the community involved, particularly when increasingly people are renting, people are living in apartments where they have nowhere to grow, and increasingly young people don't have these skills that older people have had in the past of being able to grow. So there's a skill barrier as well. During World War II, we had victory gardens all over Australia, and there were posters of, it's your obligation to teach your neighbor how to grow.
Yeah.
And there was more of that skill sharing, and people understood those kind of basic tenets of growing food. A lot of that is gone. And I know that because that was my experience up until 5-6 years ago. And so all of those kind of barriers are things that stop it from turning into an ugly, dilapidated site into a thriving community garden. And we try and work through each of those. If it's working with the different bodies that are involved in the land, to working with the community to help them through all of those hurdles, because most people only ever set up one community garden in their life. So it's hard to become an expert on insurance, on getting themselves registered, on forming a committee. But those are things that we've done over and over and over again.
And there's so many variables from each piece of land.
Oh my gosh.
So you can't just roll out a process.
Yeah.
Because there's different landowners, there's different councils, there's different zoning regulations, different planning scheme things. So 3,000 acres is in a really good place, having done lots of projects before, to be able to, know how to do it more quickly and to help the community through that process.
Absolutely. And that's everything from, as we said, kind of community gardens to community composting, setting up a hub where 250 households can be composting their scraps together. Great for people who live in an apartment and can't necessarily have a worm farm or something like that. All the way over to more intensive farming. So even in our urban environment, there are groups, both charities, market gardeners, who are farming really intensively to produce their produce, whether that's selling local food or giving it to charities that deal with food security issues. And we want to see them growing more as well. Yeah,
that's one of my favourite projects that 3,000 Acres has been involved with. It's the Second Bite Garden. In
the Fair Share Garden.
The Fair Share Garden, yeah. So they're growing tons of food now.
Absolutely.
It's incredible how much they're able to get off that site.
Absolutely.
But how many gardens do you think 3,000 Acres has started now?
Gosh, so we've been responsible ourselves for building about 19, but we've been involved with the creation of well over 30. right around Victoria, some as far as Mildura and some as central as Kensington, working with the city of Melbourne. So really diverse environments and different groups of people with different objectives, whether that's growing for themselves or growing to give the food away, but a consistent theme of people wanting a good community connection around food. And you always find, as you're setting it up, that the people working on it have this inherent desire to link in with schools in the area, link in with community centers, because it is really about welcoming in everyone.
Yeah. Is there anything surprising that you found from the gardens specifically?
Many things, but something I think that really strikes me is the kind of intergenerational multicultural aspect, that what we get in the supermarket is such a small amount of the food that's available to us, either in terms of variety of the 4,000 tomatoes that we grow, we're being served 3, but also in terms of the diversity of food, and people are trying things for the first time, and they're interacting with people who have grown up in a different country for the first time and grown different food, and that's something that consistently impresses me, that it sounds like some crunchy granola kind of fun times pitch, but I see it happening every day in the gardens. It is.
Something that I have loved seeing is the friendships developing. You know, people who met each other when we started our first garden 5 years ago in Fitzroy, they're still gardening together 5 years later, which is just fabulous.
It so is. And you see kind of organic connections. I ran a beekeeping workshop recently where one woman was talking about some scraps that she's got going, and another woman was talking about her garden, and they realized they were going to start trading one woman's chicken manure from her 6 chickens for the other woman's scraps to feed the chickens, and it was just these funny little beautiful connections that are in a world of their own and so outside of anything that kind of society is expecting us to do or how we're expected to behave.
Well, that's how you create resilient communities. You know, if you could imagine a street and draw the connections between them, you might have 1 or 2 or 3, but what we want to create is a web of connections so that people are resilient in the face of shocks and are safer and happier.
Absolutely.
And there for each other.
Reclaim that community vibe.
Totally.
Yeah.
And do you have people telling you that they're actually consuming a different type of diet?
Absolutely. So the one big one that people always get onto is silver beet, because it's dead easy to grow, but you would never buy it in the supermarket given the choice. But people say, oh, this is actually quite delicious and quite exciting. But definitely people report in general that their diet changes. And I'm lucky enough to see that myself in my own life from what I grow. But, you know, on a day where I cook a meal that has 4 of my own ingredients in it, it's a big day. It's very exciting.
Yeah, it's very satisfying.
It is satisfying. It really feels good, and you can share that with people. But people always report how that's affecting it. And I see it particularly with kids. I was working in one of our gardens recently that's out in Clyde North. And one of the parents was telling me how her son was a little bit fussy about his eating. He was having some kind of sensory issues around food. And then I was showing him how to pull up radishes, how to harvest radishes. And he pulled one up and said, "Yum!" And I looked at his mom's face, and she was just so struck by that and so over the moon too.
It's gorgeous.
Yeah, see him
so gorgeous.
Feel connected to food outside of the one thing he was really enjoying, she told me, was strawberries. So this was such a special moment.
Oh, I wish I could teach my son patience with food, because he eats.
That's the tricky one.
Like the minute something comes up, a tiny little white strawberry, he'll be like, you know, all the tiny blueberries when they're not quite plump. Yeah. One day he'll get there, and he'll learn the joy of waiting.
Learn the joy of waiting. But he will grow up knowing what food looks like, and that's really exciting.
And he understands where food comes from, because there's lots of stats around children thinking, you know, that everything just comes from the supermarket.
Yes. And
there's no, or milk comes from, you know, a box. It doesn't. Where does a carrot come from? The shop.
Absolutely.
No idea.
Yep.
Yeah.
And I've seen that in gardens when I've done some different education with students, and they think a beetroot grows in a tree, and that broccolis are trees themselves. And so it's to be able to show them, oh, look, this is the plant. And kids are like, no way! It's the craziest thing they've ever seen. And that's kind of exciting to me, because I think that's part of, as Australians, us valuing the work of farmers and understanding some really challenging times ahead in our farming communities.
Yes.
Looking at the stats of how old farmers are in Australia and how a lot of farmland people are packing up, selling the water, and moving off because they can't make the money work.
Yeah, it really gives you an appreciation for farmers.
Yes.
When you realise actually how hard it is to grow your own food.
Oh my gosh, yes.
Doesn't it? And yeah, something that I think becomes more apparent as Melbourne grows out and out and out, that we're losing some of our best farmland and best water to more housing development.
Absolutely.
And once that's gone, it's gone.
Yep.
And people don't really, I think, understand the importance of that. But when you start growing your own food, you realise actually it's precious. That soil is precious. The people who grow our food are precious. And we need to give them more support.
Absolutely.
So you start to make different choices about where you buy your food from. You start to want to know who's growing it. So you're able to have a greater appreciation for the amazing work that farmers do.
Absolutely. And I think that that's part of how urban agriculture fits into our wider kind of agricultural environment, that it's really hard to just engage with someone in a conversation over how much milk costs or why eating a plum this time of year might be an issue, versus growing your own food and going through that experience. It makes you naturally curious about the environment in which your food was grown, what it was sprayed with, things like GMO, as well as just who was the person who grew this and what has their experience been? What was it like for farmers 100 years ago and what is it like now? And that definitely, I think,
And why is everything so cheap in the
Why
supermarket?
is everything so cheap? Like, when you have grown your own head of broccoli, it makes it impossible to look at that head of broccoli in the supermarket and go, yeah, that's a fair price. That makes sense, because you know how hard that is.
It's so hard. And that's why it's so good to grow with other people.
Yes.
Yes.
You need that support.
So beyond the 30 gardens that 3,000 Acres have helped to started, tell me about some of the other things that the organisation does, so some of the teaching and helping people to grow.
Oh, it's so diverse, and that's why I love this job, that I do something different every day. Everything from this year, we had an olives to oil festival where we got a group of people together who harvested olives from street trees, olives from people's backyards where they could no longer harvest or didn't want to harvest their trees. And we had it communally pressed into olive oil so that people could have Fitzroy olive oil and Altona olive oil. It's so cool. I'm still having my Northcote olive oil all of these months later. And people loved that. They loved that idea that it was this otherwise wasted resource that was just dropping onto the pavement, that they could meet other people who were interested in that sort of project. And then, of course, to have their own olive oil was pretty exciting.
And how did that idea come about?
So community harvesting is not a new concept, kind of thinking about linking people over unwanted fruit trees. Anyone who lives in the north know that there are a lot of unharvested lemons and olives, and a lot of people who are giving away fruit through things like Good Karma networks.
Yeah.
But here was this inspiration of being able to come together over it. And my predecessor, Pippa, had actually done it on her own the year before. Her and her friends had gone olive harvesting for a weekend to see what they could collect.
Good on them.
I know, and just loved it so much on a personal sense that we said, there's something in this. This could be really fun for a bigger group of people, and sure enough, it was. So it's everything from that sort of community harvesting to one thing I'm really conscious of is that there's a lot of food growing going on in people's backyards, but you don't get to see it. It's happening behind fences, and we have very tall fences here in Melbourne that prevent us from seeing that, being educated by that, being inspired by that. And so I consider part of our role to not only demonstrate to councils that there's meaningful food growing happening behind closed doors, but on top of that, giving people the opportunity to have a sticky beak and be inspired themselves. So part of that is we know people through this urban ag movement who are growing 80 to 90% of their fruit and veg needs. And if you tell that to a lot of different...
It's amazing.
It's amazing.
It's amazing.
Absolutely incredible. In just normal Melbourne backyards. I've seen that in Northcote and Fawkner and in those sort of areas. And when you tell kind of bigger stat bodies about that, they think, no way. Like, this is just some fun kind of, I've got a couple broccoli grown here or a couple tomato plants. But no, people are meaningfully growing food. So communicating, that's part of it. But we're also doing something right now called Open Productive Backyards of Melbourne.
Ooh,
it's
what's
very
that?
Cool. So we linked up with Open Gardens Victoria, who normally focus on opening up beautiful, aesthetic, incredible gardens for tours, and the Lord Mayor's Charitable Fund, who are really interested in and concerned with people being resilient through knowing how to grow their own food and what does food growing look like in backyards. So the three of us have come together to throw open the gates to the productive backyards of Melbourne so that people can come in for tours, they can come in for workshops in people's backyards. And our big hope and our big measurement of success is when people walk away, not only do they feel like they've learned something, but have they got something that they're going to implement into their own garden. And it was really important, I think, for me in designing this project, in making sure that we were showing gardens of every type. Big, small, we even have a balcony garden on show, but also owned and rented. As someone who will probably rent for the rest of her life, it was really key to me that we were able to show that, hey, being a renter doesn't have to be a barrier to creating a home and creating a garden. And so we're opening up a lot of rental backyards, share houses, where people are growing together, keeping bees, keeping chooks, keeping quails even in their backyard, and being able to inspire other people through that.
That's so exciting.
I am so excited about it.
It really is, because I've amped up the tomato growing this year, and I've done it because I had some advice from a mentor, I guess, and she told me, you know, what to do, and I can text her and say, I've got this, do I pinch off this branch? I'm not sure. So we've had a couple of discussions about trying to start a mentorship program. Is that something that's likely to happen?
Funding dependent, but I would love that so much of our work is tied to particular councils coming to us and saying, we need a community garden here, but we have big dreams and we've got good stats coming out of the UK, coming out of the US, other European countries, about what sort of programs could actually make people grow more food or help people feel more confident, feel more connected with their communities. And that's one of them, is setting up a program in which there's a mentor-mentee relationship around food growing. There are great stats coming out of other countries for how that could help people grow food. But what we need is to be able to deliver that program in Australia, is to be able to design it and ensure that we're able to provide this really high quality program.
The good old funding game.
Funding game, indeed.
Oh, yes. So something that we've been talking about for, well, ever since we started. How is 3,000 Acres funded at the moment?
Predominantly through grants and fee-for-service. So working with councils, working with statutory bodies, and grants for specific programs. Like right now, in one council area, we have a grant to upskill 3 different community gardens that are facing some difficulties. In another, we're running with council a celebration of local food growing in that area. So we're able to fund specific projects in that way, but it makes it really difficult to fund some of the bigger ideas and some of the ongoing work.
And the ideas that have the potential to create the biggest change.
Yes.
So what could philanthropy do for 3,000 Acres?
I mean, philanthropy has already done some of this for us, that we're able to do the open productive backyards, or even we received some philanthropy to be able to build our wheelie good shed.
Yes.
Referring to a shed on wheels that's full of all the tools that community gardens need to get started. It's too expensive for them to have to buy it so that they can build their community garden. But here we have this fully movable trailer that they can hook up to a car, move to where they need it, and it's able to move all around Melbourne. So things like that we've been able to fund through philanthropy. But looking forward, I think philanthropy has the opportunity to be quite strategic in what we do. Right now it's a community garden there, and these projects where they're kind of demanded by council, but we know exactly what needs to happen to change this urban agriculture environment in Melbourne, and food growing and around the health aspect, food literacy, food security. We have big ideas for all of that, and we need to be able to drive that forward through some kind of very strategic funding where people are able to say, this is what I'm interested in, this is what I want to change. We want to talk about that because we know that it can be done.
Philanthropy is really important, I think, to enable that greater change to happen and to focus on the strategic, like you said. It's a difficult game, the funding game, and small not-for-profits. And I think I had big dreams that we'd be financially sustainable without relying upon grants and philanthropy, but you need it because the fee-for-service allows you to deliver projects. But to get the money in to make the big change, then that's often not tied to projects, but tied to the big ideas and tied to things outside of just delivering a single project.
Absolutely. And realistically here in Australia, there's been a lot of celebration lately about our urban agriculture that it was found that Melbourne had a really high number of food swaps where people were going and exchanging food without money. But realistically, we do not have the funding environment for urban agriculture than a lot of the countries that we would expect to and that we look like. The US, for example, has, despite all of the big stuff going on there, a lot of funding available to build new community gardens and a lot of funding available for groups just like ours to be able to deliver new projects and new ideas. And that just doesn't exist here. There isn't that same understanding quite yet about what urban agriculture could mean. And it's all quite new and fresh here. And we really do need, I think, in this moment to take it from a little bit everywhere to this whole movement that's able to create real change. Now is the moment for that kind of strategic investment in the future.
I completely agree. I completely agree. It's critical that we are able to boost the power of urban agriculture. I've seen a little bit of a shift in attitude over the past 5 years. When we went to talk to some of these statutory bodies 5 years ago, we almost got laughed out of their offices.
Oh,
They were
God.
like, urban agriculture, are you joking? That's a silly idea. Whereas people are beginning to realise it's an essential idea, it's not a silly idea.
Yeah.
It delivers multiple benefits, from healthy eating to community connection to mental health improvements to all of those things.
Yeah.
And I mean, you touched on food security. That's going to become a bigger and bigger issue as we see climate change having impacts and the things, there's a lot of change coming probably that we don't know the full impacts of yet. So to arm the community with the ability to grow your own food and create resilient communities, now is the time.
Absolutely, I agree with you there. I think that the food security aspect, it's not just the growing of the food, but as we've talked about, the food literacy, understanding fresh, healthy food, but it's the demand from the community that, no, we don't want to live on a street where there's a KFC and a McDonald's and nowhere to buy fresh, healthy food. But it's the role of urban planners. It's the role of people really thinking about what does a community look like and where can we create gathering spaces and healthy food that's going to make for a brighter future. So you're absolutely right on that front. And I think, as you said, now is the moment to create these changes before we see kind of changes in society that are hard to prepare for.
Yes.
Very, very scary.
Oh, perhaps we need a song. I feel like we've reached the peak. We need to end with a song.
Gosh, yes, to end on such a tragic note after we've had so many joys over broccoli and different tomatoes and all the rest. But I think that's it, that urban agriculture has this very serious root of the scary things to come, sustainability issues, people's loneliness and lack of connection, and then just joy.
It's all about the joy. It is all about the joy. It's an excuse to get together, to have fun, to eat delicious food, and to mark your year with all of these fabulous events.
Absolutely. Oh my gosh. I guess on that note, Kate, I want to say thanks for chatting. It's been so good to celebrate all things urban ag with you.
And thank you for everything that you've done for the organisation and for coming.
My pleasure.